don't go round and round when you want to talk. It is perhaps worth reflecting that at the heart of the word Parliament.
After Queen Elizabeth's private residence was handed to Lady Louise instead of staying in the expected royal circle, Camilla's family reportedly reacted with shock, and the mood inside the monarchy shifted fast. Then came the real twist. On January 28, 2026, Clarence House released a short statement that no one saw coming, and it sent waves across the United Kingdom. The message was brief but powerful. For decades, rumors swirled about hidden royal land kept far from the public eye. Now the palace confirmed one of those whispered properties was real, and it no longer belonged to the crown. The bigger surprise was the new owner. The estate went to 22-year-old Lady Louise, granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, making her sole owner of a secluded Highland retreat most people never knew existed. Inside royal circles, it was only mentioned in coded terms, never publicly named. The property, known privately as GR House, sits deep in the Scottish Highlands near the Cairngorms, spread across nearly 200 acres of rugged countryside. No road signs, no guidebook listings. Even satellite images show little more than a slate-roofed home blending into mist and trees. This was never meant to shine like Balmoral. It was personal. The land was quietly secured in 1952, soon after Elizabeth became queen. It was purchased through a discreet holding arrangement tied to the Queen Mother's estate, keeping it outside regular royal records. That decision protected its privacy for decades. Former staff described it as the late Queen's refuge, where formal rules faded. She could walk alone in a simple coat and headscarf, free from heavy expectations. In that part of Scotland, she was not the monarch, just Elizabeth. Not every family member felt the same bond. Prince Philip reportedly disliked the harsh climate. Others visited nearby areas but rarely stayed overnight. Even King Charles III never formed a deep connection to the house. Before the public announcement, insiders say legal discussions were quietly explored by members connected to Queen Consort Camilla's wider family. Advisors reviewed details and land experts checked boundaries. But the effort went nowhere. A decades-old private structure had already secured the estate's future. What truly makes GR House powerful is what sits inside. Behind its modest doors are handwritten journals, private letters, film reels, and audio recordings carefully stored away. None of it entered the official royal archives. None was meant for public display. The materials span decades, letters to world leaders, reflections after historic events, and personal thoughts never shaped by advisors. There are recorded messages addressed to grandchildren, meant to be opened at important moments in their lives. Under long-standing rules, once such items are assigned to a named heir, they cannot be reclaimed or absorbed into state collections. That heir was clearly Lady Louise, and that decision shocked many. She had never chased attention or pushed herself forward. But between 2018 and 2021, she quietly spent extended time in Scotland with her grandmother. While others balanced public duties, Louise stayed for calm walks through the hills, tea by the fire, and evenings sorting through private papers few had seen. These were not official documents. They were personal reflections, draft letters, and old photographs wrapped with care. Louise listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, and respected quiet moments. That steady presence built trust, and in the end, that trust may have changed everything. A former staff member later described Lady Louise's presence as steady, not flashy. She did not try to impress anyone. She did not speak just to be heard. She simply paid attention, without expecting anything in return. And that quiet strength meant a lot to the late Queen. People who knew the family well said the Queen saw something familiar in her granddaughter. There was calm intelligence, a real love of history, and strong self-control. Where others might have seen special access as an opportunity, Louise saw responsibility. That difference mattered. In autumn 2021, shortly after Prince Philip's funeral, a silent legal move was made. Without headlines or ceremony, a private deed secured the future of the hidden Highland retreat known internally as GR House. This step locked the estate away from institutional reshuffling or political review. The document carried strict conditions. Ownership would only pass after certain trustees were no longer living. The property would stay shielded from parliamentary examination and Crown estate control. Most striking of all, specific extended family branches were permanently denied any claim or access rights. Inside palace circles, the arrangement earned a quiet nickname, Article 31, a subtle reference to a meaningful date in the Queen's reign. Only a small group knew it existed. Her legal advisor, Princess Anne, her senior archivist, and Prince Edward understood the sensitivity. They kept silent except when absolutely necessary. At that time, Queen Camilla was reportedly unaware that such protection had been put in place. By 2024, subtle questions began to surface. They were never direct. No one openly asked about GR House. Instead, discussions focused on whether all royal holdings had been properly recorded. Within duchy disclosures, the strategy appeared careful. Direct confrontation would have drawn attention. Procedural curiosity seemed safer. Those close to the situation suggest Camilla understood her long-term influence would naturally differ from Queen Elizabeth II's historic authority. If she wanted lasting impact, she would need strong symbols, places, and projects that carried meaning beyond ceremony. On January 21, 2026, the issue reached a key moment during a private discussion at Berkhall, the Scottish residence of King Charles III. A proposal was introduced under the idea of collaborative stewardship. The secluded estate could be transformed into a center for cultural preservation, environmental research, and literary residencies. Plans included conservation grants, architectural restoration, and limited heritage tourism. On paper, it sounded constructive and forward-thinking, but some insiders questioned the deeper goal. Stewardship would mean influence. Influence would mean symbolic closeness to one of the late Queen's most private refuges. Even before formal approval, environmental consultants had reportedly visited the Highlands. Financial outlines were drafted, strategic options quietly explored. When the proposal reached the king, he did not reject it outright. Instead, he asked for careful review. Legal advisors revisited old agreements. Officials examined ownership records going back to the early 1950s. Meetings were delayed under the explanation of due diligence. Then, on January 26th, a small meeting took place. Present were the king, his principal private secretary, and 2 constitutional advisors. After reviewing everything, the conclusion was delivered calmly. The estate, he said, was not subject to reassignment, now or in the future. The response was polite and controlled. It referenced a prior private settlement outside Crown authority. No further detail was offered. Lady Louise's name was not spoken. Article 31 remained undisclosed. To outsiders, it appeared routine. Inside palace walls, the meaning was clear. A boundary had been drawn years earlier, and it would stand. Those present described the atmosphere as calm but firm. The king's tone left no space for negotiation. The legal structure was solid. When the meeting ended, Camilla reportedly remained composed, yet it became clear that a deeper arrangement had been set long before recent inquiries began. 72 hours later, confirmation arrived. On a crisp January morning in 2026, Buckingham Palace issued a carefully worded notice with major impact. The secluded Highland retreat, long whispered about, had not been placed in trust or shared among senior royals. It had been granted entirely to Lady Louise Windsor, not to her father, Prince Edward, not to a foundation, not under joint control, to her alone. Queen Elizabeth II had finalized her private testament in autumn 2021, weeks after marking a deeply personal milestone in her reign. That sealed document, protected under long-established law, named her granddaughter as the sole and unrestricted owner of GR House. The bequest covered everything: the land, the residence, its contents, the archived materials, staff agreements, and most importantly, the authority to refuse any request for public access. One clear sentence in the will captured the Queen's intention. The property was to remain a sanctuary, not a spectacle. Those who knew her said the decision reflected her character, measured, deliberate, and steady under pressure. Even in her final arrangements, she protected what mattered most to her, and she chose carefully who would carry that responsibility forward. For members of the extended Parker Bowles circle, the announcement hit like an earthquake. Quiet plans had already been forming around the Highlands. There were early talks about culinary festivals, heritage partnerships, even seasonal events celebrating regional produce near the estate. Nothing official yet, but ideas were moving. Within hours of the palace statement, those conversations intensified. Then reality landed hard. The will had shut every door inside royal channels. First came disbelief, then frustration. Some believed the retreat would eventually fall under shared stewardship. Others assumed it would stay dormant under broader management. Instead, the late monarch had drawn a final line and made it legally unbreakable. Calls went out to legal advisors across London and beyond. The response was the same everywhere. The testament was airtight. No loopholes, no weak wording, No room for interpretation. The structure fully protected the gift.
Charge about. It was all very sort of laid back and happy, and we used to go off.
What size is this bear? Big. This is a big bear.
At the center of it all stood Queen Camilla, facing a difficult truth. Years of public service did not guarantee inheritance. Influence did not override private intention. Dedication did not change a sealed will. But here's where it shifts. While others were reacting, Lady Louise had not been caught off guard. Months earlier, in summer 2025, residents near Glenmore noticed a young woman visiting quietly. She wore simple outdoor clothes, no motorcade, just one discreet protection officer. When locals spoke to her, she mentioned academic research into highland land management and ecology. That was only part of the story. Under guidance from 2 retired archival specialists and a senior constitutional advisor, Louise had been preparing. She studied preservation rules for fragile letters. She reviewed estate administration, from payroll systems to land use compliance. She examined privacy law and succession rights. One mentor later said she approached it not as a privilege, but as a duty. She asked careful questions. She took detailed notes. She understood that owning GR House meant guarding memory itself. When the transfer officially activated, there was no ceremony. The first sign appeared as a quiet update in the National Land Registry database. Days later, the palace confirmed what had already happened. The shift was serious. Lady Louise was no longer simply a reserved young royal focused on her studies. She had become custodian of a private historical archive beyond the reach of ministers, trustees, or even future sovereigns. Symbolically, she now held authority in one area that stood independent of court hierarchy. That mattered. She did not manage the transition alone. Her strongest ally was Princess Anne. Practical, direct, and steady. Anne handled the operational side with precision. Staff salaries were secured through a heritage framework. Sensitive documents were relocated under strict conditions. During a private gathering in Scotland, Anne personally handed Louise a sealed envelope containing final authorization codes for the estate's internal security system. When informal questions surfaced later, Anne's response was short and firm. A sovereign's lawful decision, once enacted, is not open to reinterpretation. Rather than escalate tension publicly, she worked behind the scenes. Financial audits aimed at Louise's holdings were reviewed and addressed. Potential leaks about the estate's location were intercepted. Security was quietly strengthened. Those precautions proved necessary. In late 2025, cybersecurity consultants linked to Prince Edward's office detected attempts to digitally map the estate's perimeter using remote aerial devices. Trail cameras were discovered near woodland access paths. None reached the inner grounds. The situation was handled quietly but decisively. Even Prince Edward became involved during the final phase. In November 2025, an appeal was reportedly made to delay public confirmation for the sake of family harmony. His response, according to sources familiar with the exchange, was direct. His daughter's role was not symbolic, and it was not temporary. That ended the debate. The deed stood. The will remained sealed. And for the first time since Queen Elizabeth II's passing, the balance of influence around one of her most personal legacies shifted permanently. There was no celebration, no grand display. Just the quiet certainty that her final decision had taken effect exactly as written. But it did not stop there. 1 week after the inheritance became public, something subtle changed the atmosphere again. On February 6th, Lady Louise Windsor entered St. Columba's Chapel, an old stone church along a narrow lane a few miles from the estate. The building had stood for centuries, weathered by wind and rain. She arrived without ceremony. No press lines, no blocked roads. One vehicle dropped her off and left. She walked the final stretch alone, coat fastened against the cold. But one detail stood out. Pinned to her navy lapel was an unfamiliar brooch, a wreath of Scottish heather woven around an English rose, joined at the center by a small sapphire shaped like a shield. Later photographs revealed 4 engraved words on the back, steadfast beyond applause. Historians quickly recognized the phrase. It had appeared in private notes written by Queen Elizabeth II to a small circle of family members, including Princess Anne. It was never public, never a slogan. It was a reminder. Inside the chapel, Louise placed white flowers beneath a simple memorial plaque honoring her grandmother's decades of service. About 40 local parish members and volunteers were present for what had been described as a small community fundraiser. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm and steady. "The Crown entrusted this place to me," she began. "It is not a prize to display. It is a responsibility to protect. I hold it not because of position, but because of what I was taught, that service is strongest when it is quiet." She paused, looking toward the altar. "We cannot reshape memory to suit convenience. We safeguard it with care, even when it asks for patience rather than praise." The moment spread quickly across media platforms. When she finished, she inclined her head toward the engraved stone bearing one of her grandmother's reflections. "Duty gives purpose to power, not the other way around." The symbolism spoke for itself, measured, composed, and unmistakable.
Every day, and I do not know how he managed to do that, but he would also tell me all sorts of anecdotes.
Later that evening, Princess Anne released a rare public note of support, reinforcing the message without adding drama. It was brief. "Lady Louise does not speak for ambition," the note read. "She speaks for continuity." The reaction was instant. King Charles III quietly cleared 2 engagements and returned to Scotland for private talks with Prince Edward. At the same time, Queen Camilla was photographed entering Clarence House without comment, her expression guarded. Many had expected the family to show unity behind closed doors. Instead, that unity seemed to settle firmly around Louise. Headlines rolled in fast. "Quiet resolve redefines royal strength," and "A new voice without the noise." Even Catherine, Princess of Wales, joined in subtly. She posted a handwritten message online. "Inheritance is not ownership, it is stewardship." Within an hour, millions had reacted. Behind palace walls, advisors at St. James's Palace met to assess what this meant long-term. Louise held no new formal rank, yet her influence was growing beyond hierarchy. Prince William was said to view the moment not as rivalry, but reinforcement. A senior aide shared that he believed she was living the values they were raised to respect. For many watching, Louise had shifted from reserved granddaughter to moral anchor, representing restraint over performance. But momentum rarely moves without pushback. Within days, Queen Camilla launched a new initiative titled Service in the Modern Age. Held in one of Windsor Castle's grand halls, the exhibition highlighted her charitable work through photographs, speeches, and testimonials. The timing raised questions. It was announced less than an hour after news broke of a joint archival project between Louise and Princess Anne focused on preserving lesser-known royal history. "Service must be seen to be understood," Camilla stated. The contrast was sharp. When reporters asked Princess Anne for comment, she replied calmly, "Understanding does not always require spectacle." The king did not attend the exhibition opening, citing a prior medical appointment. Attendance was limited. Public response remained polite but muted. Critics called the display polished, yet distant. Then Catherine posted again, this time a candid image of Louise and Anne seated at a wooden table surrounded by archival boxes. The caption read, "Preserving quietly." Engagement numbers soared once more. Soon after, accounts described a controlled but firm exchange between Camilla and Anne in a Windsor corridor. Camilla reportedly suggested that Louise's growing profile had been encouraged intentionally. Anne's answer was measured. "Public respect cannot be manufactured. It must be earned." The conversation ended without resolution. Within a week, Camilla's exhibition closed earlier than planned, officially due to scheduling adjustments. No further explanation was given. Shortly afterward, the royal website introduced a new feature titled Enduring Service, The Unseen Years. It showcased personal letters, overlooked initiatives, and stories rarely covered by headlines. The project was credited to Lady Louise and Princess Anne. At the top appeared a line attributed to Queen Elizabeth II, "Dignity outlasts display." Without open confrontation, the narrative had shifted. Major newspapers began describing Louise as the late Queen's spiritual successor, not in law or rank, but in character. Commentators called her the steady pulse of the monarchy. In an age of constant headlines, her restraint stood out. Universities took notice. Invitations arrived from Oxford and Cambridge to speak on responsibility and modern leadership. Even Harvard extended a request for a lecture on heritage and public ethics. For someone who once avoided attention, the spotlight now followed her everywhere. Then came the numbers. On February 5th, a BBC survey showed that 71% of people in the UK supported granting Louise a formal royal title if she chose public duties. In Scotland, support rose to 84%. Public trust was climbing fast. 2 days later, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles III had privately offered her elevation to Her Royal Highness Princess Louise, along with a defined role centered on youth development, cultural preservation, and civic education. But the offer carried conditions. She would need to divide time between Scotland and London, accept full-time security, undergo official briefings and oversight, relinquish outside professional interests, including equestrian coaching, which she quietly loved. Inside the family, opinions differed. Princess Anne supported the offer but cautioned that identity must come before image. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, reportedly worried more about pressure than prestige. "A title," she said privately, "carries expectations that never rest." Then tensions sparked from abroad. On February 10th, Meghan Markle appeared on an American talk show and made a pointed comment about people being rewarded for quiet branding instead of visible service. She did not name Louise, but the connection felt obvious. Social media erupted. Hashtags debating the value of silence began trending worldwide. The following day, Princess Anne and Prince Edward released a calm joint statement. Louise had never pursued platform or position, it said. She accepted responsibility when required and stepped back when not. Nothing more. Public opinion shifted quickly. Many viewed the criticism as unnecessary. Sympathy for Louise deepened. On February 14th, standing outside the Highland estate as snow fell softly, Louise made her own announcement. She introduced the Grey House Trust, an independent foundation dedicated to protecting historical archives and supporting young leaders who serve without recognition. "Leadership is not about being seen," she said. "It is about being steady." More than 9 million people watched. When asked directly whether she would accept the princess title, she paused. She thanked the king for his confidence but explained that duty does not depend on rank. For now, she said, she would remain Lady Louise. Days later, the king sent her a handwritten letter, described by aides as rare. He wrote that her grandmother believed true strength grows quietly. Louise replied with equal grace. She did not seek crowns, only purpose. By mid-February, observers agreed something fundamental had shifted. A new moral center had formed within the royal family. On one side stood visibility and presentation. On the other stood patience and principle. The public gave her an informal name, Guardian of Grey House. In the end, this was never just about land or titles. It was about serving without applause, protecting without complaint, choosing dignity when noise would have been easier. Lady Louise did not inherit a throne. She inherited the weight behind it, identity, memory, and responsibility. And whether or not she ever accepts a title, her quiet rise has already reshaped the conversation about what royal leadership can look like in the years ahead.